Hello, and welcome to our American Revolution iMovie project for Mr. Zucker's Period 3 APUSH class. To start off, I'm going to be debunking some myths about the American Revolution and even talking a little bit about how awesome the American colonies were doing during their time under British rule. Everything was all good. The people were doing great. The country was just coming back from fighting in the French and Indian War, which was thought to prove a great gain for the colonists in expansion, and the governments had been enjoying a large amount of legislative autonomy for quite a long time. The First Great Awakening had reached the Americas, and there was a period of unity among the colonists, and it is said that this was the first time that the American colonies had been unified in their beliefs and were the closest in religious beliefs. In a more secular area, really only one city wanted to revolt for most of the time in the colonies, which was Boston, and the other two-thirds of people either wanted some kind of reform or were fine with the way the government operated already. There was prosperity within the land on the account that natural resources were constantly being traded with Britain, and the American colony's economy was only second to Britain's own massive economy. So the question arises, why would the American colonists revolt if they seem to have a pretty sweet deal already? Well, this iMovie will soon explain why, and more regarding the seemingly incomprehensible need for revolt. The first problem that we encountered is that the economic prosperity of the American colonies gave a false sense of wellness and security by being under English rule. Since many of the people were well off with the current trade with Britain, there was little to no effort in trying to change what was thought to be a good system. However, in reality, the American colonies weren't going to be getting much farther in their trade with England, seeing as they were in a mercantilist economy, where America only trades natural resources that would allow the British a constant supply of materials to manufacture items and therefore make a bigger profit. In addition to the small amount of benefits on the end of the colonies, the British were also holding back the American colonies from trading with empires such as the French, since that would be hurting the mercantilist advantage of having America as a colony. Even though there was trade with restricted countries through the black market, people saw the restriction as a way to put them down and keep the colonies reliant on England for their prosperity, as they have already been. The second problem that we encountered was that the political tension within the revolution was focused on the bypassing of American laws and standards through the British Parliament. One might think, well, if this is just a colony, then what's the problem with being ruled by the motherland? But America had enjoyed so much autonomy to the point where there were institutions of law that had existed for generations and had their own way of doing things, which were automatically bypassed by those in Britain. Multiple acts were passed that did not fit into colonial life, such as the Cigarette Act, which allowed British courts to try colonial smugglers, or the Stamp Act, which gave the colonies a chance to unite in order to fight off British taxation through a boycott supported through the entirety of the colonies. Despite these taxes being replaced, Britain quickly decided to pass the Declaratory Act, which made it clear that the actions, such as the repealing of the Stamp Act, were made solely by Britain with no assistance from the colonies. Even further than any of these previous transgressions was the refusal to allow any form of American or colonial representation in general. This idea was justified by the way the British Parliament ran. If all the colonies had their own piece of parliamentary space, they would be so outnumbered by the English majority that it would make the situation for the colonies even worse than their current standing. Lastly, the social problems of the American Revolution revolved around the subordination of the colonists to the mainland British. It could even be said that the entirety of the American Revolution is focused upon America being subordinated to Britain in some way. But no other problem displays this better than the social predicament of the American Revolution. Simply being born of a colony, especially in America, could put you in a lower status. The reason for this is that those that had to go to America were religious dissenters, younger children of nobles who did not inherit any land, or peasants who fled to find work in the New World, and those that are descended from them are no better no matter how educated or affluent they may have become. This created an even more outstanding tension considering that many colonists felt more British than those still on the mainland of Britain. One such act that demonstrates this is the Quartering Act, which forced the colonists to open their homes to British forces, which exposed them to the harsh British outlook on the colonies. Another social jab at the colonists would be the acts that created Quebec and forced religious tolerance for Catholics. Now on to its solutions. Since the revolutionaries wanted to change the way that they were treated through the economy by England, the Boston Tea Party was initiated as a form of protest. The Tea Party was thought to be a successful protest, but instead it led to the intolerable acts being passed by Britain, thus leading to a movement in the revolution. Soon after the revolution, changes took place to the economy that would better it altogether. The most significant was that the people were able to trade freely since there was no need to support Britain's needs of raw materials. This would eventually lead to a new economic system that would work just as well, if not better, than mercantilism. The new system, capitalism, would allow for free trade and fair competition among companies. Also, since the colonies were no longer restricted to be independent on England, more manufactured goods could be made, allowing for prosperity and better trade relations. Next up is the solutions in the political region. The founding fathers wanted to have their say, so they turned to Democrats. Not like today's Democrats, but rather men who used and fought for ideals of the common people. John P. Roche states that the Philadelphia Conference was not just a meeting of elites to gain control of the colonies, but rather representatives of their respective states there to convey the thoughts and public opinions of their people. And since all the states decided differing attributes to their government, the United States slowly started to create its own form of democracy. The founding fathers also used the technique to win over the unsure and stop the opposition by simply asking for vague reforms while formulating more arguments according to the current events. Roche also states that during the Revolution, the colonies had four major pillars to their political success. First was the charismatic character of George Washington as a leadership focal point. Second was the intellectual capability of the majority of the leadership of the Revolution, coupled with the large networking of men working for the combined cause. Third was the ability to make the issues of the revolution the premier issue of the colonies. And lastly, the appeal of a new man belonging not Britain, which forfeited their identity, but of America, with an identity all of their own. Lastly, in the social realm of the solutions and changes, the colonists slowly began to create their own personal identity as Americans. Men stopped arguing for rights as subjects of Britain and decided to start fighting for rights using abstract ideas such as God given and unalienable rights. Another huge point for the social changes within the colonies line up on the side of large scale propaganda, such as the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, which displayed and even exaggerated the plight of these fighting for the freedom of the colonies from British bondage, and even more widespread were the copies of Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense, which protested the logic of allowing Britain to rule over America any longer, seen as the American public was superior and should deserve not only to be treated as such, but to demand to be noticed throughout the world. Once the American Revolution was over, there was a change in how people saw themselves and the general identity of what used to be the colonists. The new economic system would allow for free trade and competition amongst companies. The customs such as the chain of being were thrown out, and the economic classes were modified to allow men to buy land and become more affluent through their own work and ability, with a change to male suffrage for those without land, which allowed for the urban population to grow later on. Soon after the war was over, there was a need for change on the land system that had been implemented during Britain's rule. Another example would be that the local governments took away the lands from the Tories, redistributing it to those that could buy it and stopped paying tolls to the king for simply being on that land. Jameson Franklin brings up the point that once the land was redistributed and the government established, states started to make laws as to what the requirements of voters would be. At first, it started with landowners. Once more laws were passed, the next step was people with personal property, and lastly was any man that was a taxpayer. Each of these changes to the country established the modern day identity of an American being a hard-working, tax-paying, and law-abiding citizen with natural rights.